Hoje vamos passar para vocês o vídeo do nosso side event, que foi sobre a comunidade de turismo se envolvendo com a questão da preservação da biodiversidade, certo, chefe?
Isso aí. Os usos não extrativos da biodiversidade é o tema que a gente trouxe esse ano para a Convenção da Biodiversidade, para fazer frente a todo esse lobby da pesca industrial, da máfia dos traficantes de fauna, dos madeireiros, que sempre se representam nos tratados internacionais, e a gente que promove emprego e renda com a conservação através de usos não extrativos, do mergulho e ecoturismo, quase nunca é ouvido. Para isso a gente trouxe a Declaração de Usos Não Extrativos de Biodiversidade, que está no nosso site do Divers for Sharks. A gente distribuiu aqui, apresentou ao secretário da convenção e levamos para esse side event para discutir com representantes importantes de diversos setores esse tema, do uso não extrativo da biodiversidade, da sua importância e da necessidade de proteger esse uso contra os usos extrativos e predatórios.
Exatamente. Aproveita que você está aqui, depois que assistir esse vídeo, assiste os outros vídeos desse nosso canal e pode passar o link para os seus amigos, www.youtube.tv.br. Quer dar um toque em inglês alguma coisa?
Just follow the video and the discussion.
Yes.
I think you're gonna like it.
José Palazzo, and I'm here tonight actually wearing two hats. One of my little environmental consultancy in ecotourism and environmental issues in Brazil, and the other hat is I'm the environmental ambassador for dive operation in the Federated States of Micronesia called Manta Ray Bay Resort and Yacht Divers. And my colleague who's going around with the camera, we're a volunteer group with very little funding, so we kind of do all this stuff ourselves, including taking pictures. Paulo Guilherme is a dive operator from Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. He's a Platinum Pro 5000 SSI diver, which makes him kind of a living legend of diving in Brazil. And
Sounds like a note.
and he also is the co-founder of Divers for Sharks, a global campaign that mobilizes people in the diving industry to support shark conservation. I want to welcome in our name and the name of the 83 companies in 44 countries and territories, and this number is growing, which have signed the declaration that we're distributing tonight and presenting tomorrow morning to the Secretary of CBD. The latest signature on the declaration is from Peter Hughes, one of the most important people in the diving liveaboard industry. I also want to welcome Valerie Hickey. Valerie is a biodiversity specialist with the World Bank, but also she has a long history of contribution to conservation, also at other outfits like the World Wildlife Fund, Wildlife Conservation Society, the U.S. National Park Service. Work has been really important in many areas, including the use of natural resources to alleviate poverty. It's a real pleasure to have you here. And also, I want to welcome my friend Peter Kushler, who has helped us a lot in coming here. Peter works with the International Fund for Animal Welfare. He also has a long and fruitful career of helping wildlife conservation in many different areas. I wouldn't dare trying to highlight a specific one, but he's been around international treaties for a long time. I'll just make a very brief introduction and then let people talk. We have a little video about Ecuador, 5 minutes, one that I'll show you in the end. But Valerie needs to run, so we will talk a little bit before that, and I'll show you the video later. Also, I'd like to thank you all for your presence, but in particular, Mr. Joseph Aitaro. Joe works, is a grants assistant at the Office of the President of the Republic of Palau. Palau has been a major driving force behind the ecotourism industry and marine conservation. And one of our lifelong dreams is to be able to meet and shake hands with his president, Tony Romansol, that we hope to do between now and next year. We are honored by your presence, representing your country. Thank you very much too. Friends, what brought us here basically is the dire situation that we know is waiting for us outside. The world wildlife populations, as we have heard, have halved in the last 40 years. Global biodiversity outlook is gloomy for species and ecosystems. There is enormous waste of natural resources. Devastation of the natural world, which continues today, is clearly not needed to feed humankind and promote development, but it's a product of our lack of rationalization of the use of those resources. 1/3 of the food production is wasted. More than 60% of all fisheries is unsustainable. Plus, there's enormous waste of biomass in fisheries by destruction of ecosystems and bycatch. All this has an immediate impact on non-extractive uses of nature and the business that support it. Worldwide, these non-extractive activities like diving, whale watching, bird watching, tracking, these activities keep growing in importance as thousands and thousands of mainly small companies provide services for these activities, and in turn also build local skills and provide employment, capacity building for local people. And many of these people have previous occupations that are already at risk because of unsustainable uses of the environment. And we're going to see a little bit of that in the Ecuador video. These non-extractive businesses contribute, therefore, quite a lot in jobs and revenue, but also in helping to maintain social cohesion, of strengthening communities, of rescuing cultural values, and therefore non-extractive uses go well beyond the monetary value that they represent. These gains, social, economic, environmental, are definitely at risk. Not only unsustainable extractive uses, biodiversity continuing on a large scale in many countries and international waters, but also particular management aspects which are essential for non-extractive uses are in general ignored. It is not enough, for instance, to look at biological sustainability of species harvest, but also you must consider if such harvest is not deeply affecting a non-extractive use, which can provide much more benefit than the harvest. Cases well known are sharks in Palau, for instance, which are now fully protected because they're much more valuable for ecotourism through diving, and humpback whales in the North Atlantic, especially in the Caribbean and Dominican Republic. Tourism has been treated at international conventions, including CBD, but in general, we've been talking about regulating tourism and its impacts on biodiversity, which is fair enough, has to be done, or discussing ways to improve its benefits to local communities. But we need to look into these different aspects of protecting non-extractive uses from the encroachment of unsustainable extractive uses, and also dealing with specific management needs. The declaration that we're bringing forward has therefore two main aims. One is to flag out the need for urgent action by international treaties and national governments to stop this tide of unsustainable uses of biodiversity, to protect the jobs and revenue that we generate, and the other is to demand that non-extractive businesses and their particular management needs be properly considered when the international treaties and governments take management decisions affecting the businesses and the livelihoods of the communities that depend on us. We would like to be put on the agenda, basically, and not just as a sideshow or as a problem, but also as a mainstream stakeholder community. To be listened to, protected to the extent that it's possible, and engaged in finding a common way forward. That was my very short introduction, and I'd like to pass it on to Valerie. Thank you for being with us.
No, thank you. Sorry, that was a bit too loud. Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here because I think we don't do enough of this at the CBD Con, but every other meeting we have, we don't engage business. And so one of the things I want to do is I want to examine two of the words in this declaration that to me are key. The first is non-extractive and the second is business. So let me start with the non-extractive part. This morning I gave a talk on wildlife crime, and Peter knows that field better than I ever will. But one of the reasons we find that wildlife crime has really escalated recently, it's been with us forever, but it's gotten very, very bad, is because of basically four things, four attributes of biodiversity. One is that it's generally undervalued. Even where it is valued, it's largely undervalued. It's not counted, we don't know how much of it is there. So we don't know if it goes missing all the time, usually until it's gone. We don't guard it. There simply aren't enough park rangers, there aren't enough people to guard this, to control it, to make sure people aren't stealing it. And the ownership is unclear. Biodiversity is a public asset. If everybody owns it, maybe nobody owns it. The thing about non-extractive businesses is that in many ways, it's an antidote to each of these four things. So again, let me start with the non-extractive part. It's incredibly critical to how we can conserve biodiversity. There's always going to be extractive uses, and it's always going to be important that we can extract and use biodiversity if we can do it sustainably. But the non-extractive uses are the golden chalice. They're the win-win scenarios. They're what the protected area system in the United States, for example, that generates billions of dollars every year in revenues for local communities and for the national treasury relies upon. It's the non-extractive uses. These are absolutely critical. It doesn't mean, though, that it's easy, and I wanted to raise two challenges that I think this team, more than anybody knows about. The first has to do with managing expectations. Because this is the holy grail, because this is about the win-win solution, people tend to think it can work anywhere, and it can't. There are places where you can't do non-extractive uses. There are places where tourists will never go. I remember one of my first trips for the World Bank was to go to the Ivory Coast, Côte d'Ivoire, many years ago. It was right before one of their most recent, it was about a decade ago, right before one of their most recent sort of civil war, civil unrest periods. And we went right to the north of the country to talk about ecotourism. This is a place where we had to go with armed guards because it was so unsafe, where the wildlife had all been poached out. And yet for 3 years, we had made the mistake of telling communities, no, let's conserve your biodiversity because tourists will come. Tourists weren't going to come. We had raised expectations. We have to be very careful with non-extractive uses that we don't unnecessarily raise expectations. There are places tourists will never come to. There are places that are wonderful to dive. There are places that don't really have such great diving anymore, in part because of natural disasters. I was in Samoa just a month ago for the SIDS conference. And compared to somewhere like Palau these days, the diving in Samoa is very poor because they've had hurricanes, tsunamis, and cyclones come through that have absolutely destroyed their coral reefs. So that's the other part of managing expectations, is that tourism, as these guys know better than I do, is a very elastic industry. It's good one day, it can be very bad the next. Look at places like Liberia that actually had a very burgeoning nature-based tourism sector growing up in the last few years. Obviously, it's now done for a long time because of the Ebola scam. The same is true of places that suffer from natural disasters. So we have to manage expectations. The other part of the non-extractive uses is we still have to manage impact. I think we think sometimes because it's non-extractive, it's impact-free. Of course it isn't. We have to think about how much impact. And non-extractive uses, particularly when you look at the tourism sector, can be one of two types. You can be high volume, low value. So the sort of backpacker tourists, you get lots of people in. They're not individually going to spend a lot, but together it's a lot of money. Or it's the sort of low volume, high value. And in many ways, diving fits in that, because diving is expensive. It's not a cheap pursuit. And so you tend to have a different kind of person. It's not generally the backpackers who are going diving. And so again, it's about managing the impact and thinking about what are the limits of acceptable change for what we do. And I think those are two of the big challenges with the non-extractives. But it's incredibly vital that we engage and we begin to have an honest conversation. And the only way we can have that honest conversation is with business adaptation. And this to me is the most important part of this declaration is the word businesses. Because at the end of the day, the private sector and businesses are what's going to make biodiversity exist or go extinct. Either we get businesses, we work with them, and we stop demonizing them. I've been at several of these COPs, I've been at several biodiversity meetings, I'm sure Peter can affirm, where oftentimes business is seen as the enemy. Keep private sector's hands off biodiversity. It's just silliness. We have to engage private sector. We have to engage them because they're the people who provide the jobs for local community. We always talk about wanting local communities to engage with us, protecting biodiversity. When we say it's unguarded, one of the ways we want to resolve that problem is by getting local community guards. They're only going to do that if they can actually get paid, if there's a job. Or if someone in their family is working in the local hotel, or is working as a local guide for bird watchers, or working as a local guide for divers. We have to get businesses involved because businesses are the lifeblood of conservation at the end of the day, particularly non-extractive businesses. The other reason, of course, is a more broad reason. There's been a lot of discussion at this COP and at the last few COPs on resource mobilization. Everyone you talk to will say there's not enough money in conservation. It's hard to tell whether that's true or not because we don't always count out, but I do know for sure that every year there's about $175 billion of development assistance sent from the sort of theoretical north to the traditional south. So from developed countries to developing countries, $175 billion. Of that, about 0.3% goes to biodiversity. It's not a lot. But what's important is that's just public money. For every dollar of public money sent south, there's $3 of private sector money sent south. And there's another $3 in domestic private sector money raised and mobilized and used. So if we want to attempt resource mobilization and we really want to raise the financing we need to make a dent in conservation, the private sector has the money. And they have the self-interest. Nobody's going to invest and build a hotel to attract tourists to come and see a particular bird or an elephant if the elephants aren't going to be there in 5 years, if the birds are all going to be gone because the flyway is no longer. The same is true of diving. It's in divers' interest to make sure, dive shops' interest to make sure that the coral reefs are healthy. And so this is the second part of why the private sector is so important. Yes, it's money. There's no question about it. They are partners in resource mobilization. But it's also just numbers. The citizen science that can be generated by the tourists is incredible. Again, one of the problems with biodiversity is it's uncounted and it's unguarded. There's nobody better to do the counts and to guard biodiversity than the tourists who go and see it. Imagine a pen and paper in every tourist's hand, or in every diver's hand, to just quickly tell us what's the state of the coral reef, or how many birds on what day at what time did they see. All of a sudden, all the money we think is missing from science, we can't get the scientists into the field. We don't need scientists. They can give us the tools. We need the tourists who are out there. People who are spending the money to go see this, to go and do the counts for us, to provide us information about bad behavior they're seeing when they see it, to do the kind of citizen arrests, I think is very possible. So that's again why I'm so excited about this declaration. I'm so excited to have the pleasure and the honor to sit up here, because if we're going to achieve the AG targets by 2020, we can't do it without business. We can't do it without non-extractive businesses. And we have to have them at the table more often. And in fact, they should be leading at the table and telling us what we need to do to de-risk the sector and to make sure that they can crowd in all their investments and all their tourists to make this work. So good luck.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Valerie, for accepting to be hijacked at such short notice and for sharing your wisdom. If we meet in Sydney for the World Parks Congress, I may repeat the hijacking. If you like. Thank you so much. Peter, please.
Well, thank you. This is hard to follow. Well, IFAW, the International Fund for Animal Welfare, is an organization where we have a vision of a world where animals are respected and protected. And we believe that this is actually a precondition for a better and more peaceful world, better for animals and for people. Why I'm saying that is just to kind of like introduce ourselves a little bit and why we are very interested in the non-extractive focus as well. But this is not about black and white. It's not like non-extractive against extractive, and extractive has no room. This is not the point, but it is about where to draw the line. It is also about that non-extractive usually gets completely, or at least very much ignored. It has not been valued to the point, to the benefit for humans, to the benefit for the future of this planet and the planet's biodiversity. And I think there is a big chance and opportunity to win a lot for also for the CBD and the CBD's ambition to achieve the strategy and the ID targets by 2020, and particularly the vision by 2050, if more focus is given to non-extractive use possibilities and benefits. That said, we believe that management anyway and policy decisions need to be guided, first of all, by recognizing that animals have intrinsic value and are sentient beings, because that may change also a little bit our perspective when we draw the line and we take the decision where to find the balance, what is right and what is no more acceptable. We also think that policy should be based, of course, on sound science that should inform the decisions. It should be drawn on traditional knowledge. We need to come together to bring our expertise together, etc., to come to the right decision. But it also should be taken into account the high level of ethical treatment of animals. Because again, we believe that really a different respect, a high level of respect and high ethical values that the world community can agree to will help to make this planet a more peaceful world and a more prosperity in the sense of biodiversity and a fair and more equity development of this world and the human population on it. In a nutshell, it says that conservation decisions, and of course it comes down to conservation decisions at the end where to draw the line, they should be guided by ecological and biological sustainability, the ethical treatment of animals, and the precautionary principle. And there again, a lot of times we may actually come to a point where non-extractive utilization is much easier to be reversed, to be drawn back, because of course you were right. A lot of times non-extractive utilization also has major impacts on the animals, on biodiversity in general, on habitats, but also of course social impacts, etc., and may need to be reversed. Extractive consumption is much harder to reverse mistakes that we do, and we need to be more cautious in terms of the speeds that we allow the development of extractive. Unfortunately, with extractive use, we are much further into nature already than with the non-extractive use. So maybe that is one point that we may want to change or reverse in terms of the balance. A lot of times when it comes to non-extractive use, of course, tourism is the point of discussion, and it is a big issue in many parts of the world. The point about whale watching was mentioned here. Whale watching in times where commercial whaling was on its peak, still in the 70s and 80s, was seen as commercially not interested, not viable, no chance. Nowadays it's much, much larger than the commercial whaling was in the early 80s or even in the 70s. And of course it's a lasting business. Nevertheless, tourism in many ways is very fragile, and we know that as well. Looking at Ebola now as Africa stops tourism from coming. Any alarm message about terrorist attacks in Eastern Africa stops tourism from coming. And quickly, kind of like economies which have been built on that are gone. But I would like to look in the minds as well, even though that tourism, because it has grown, nature tourism, wildlife tourism, wildlife watching tourism has grown to billions of dollars a year. It has so much attention for good reasons. But there is so much more which just hasn't been valued and put into economic terms. Non-extractive use also can help a lot in contradiction to extractive use a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times, and help a lot to preserve ecosystem services, and a lot do to preserve habitats which are very important in their resilience power against climate change, against desertification. And all this needs to be seen in the also economic evaluation of this. And suddenly, even if tourism is very fragile, I think the view will change in terms of the amount, even purely economic amount, of values that is given with the non-extractive side of things. That said, I also am very, very delighted, I'm very excited actually about this declaration. And when Jose kindly asked me to whether I consider to get any ideas or support the side event, I said immediately, yes, of course. This is a fantastic initiative. I think if we can manage that in the governmental discussions, in national governments, but also, of course, here in those international treaties, across the UN system and outside, bring the non-extractive use as to be looked at as much as the extractive use opportunities. I think we will have a very different world, and we will be much closer to achieve the IG targets and the CBD strategy.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's amazing what we can do with a little bunch of volunteers amassing the support and the wisdom of people like you two guys. Thank you very much for that. Paulo, if you would leave the camera for a second and come here and offer a couple of thoughts, then we can move on and present a little video and go on to this conversation.
Thank you, my friend. Well, I'm going to be really short because actually they said everything that I was planning to say. And I'm really happy to see anthropodiversity here, ages, different countries. So this just shows that we are united for something special. Earlier we are thinking, we made a lot more copies than we need. How many people is going to go there and watch us? And then I said, well, if one go, okay, that's fine. And I'm really happy that I can see the people from youth, Palau, and this shows that we are going to try to change something. I guess because this, basically this was the main goal of our presence here, to make people stop a little bit, to talk about the problems, to just justify the problems and try to do something. That's actually what I feel misses on these conferences, a little more action. And I guess that's what we are talking about here, what we can do to act. And ecotourism is fine, it's pleasure, it can make money, and it can protect also. Why not? Why not? I guess that's my final line, because the rest they already talked, and I would like to ask you guys to participate. Who wants to talk about something? Agree, disagree, yes? We had some gifts for the persons who sat on the first line. As no one sees them there, you are not going to get caps, t-shirts, and things like that. Okay, that's me. I'm kind of yeah. He already got his one. Thank you.
Joe, thank you very much.
Yes. Yes.
My name is Joe. I'm from Palau, and I feel like I need to stand up and say a few words. Why? Well, my country, we were the first country in the world to actually declare our waters shark sanctuary. And he declared that in Honduras, Guatemala, and our neighboring countries in the West Pacific, Micronesia, and so forth, also started declaring their waters as a shark sanctuary. And mainly for two reasons. Number one is the sharks are apex predators. They keep the balance within the marine ecosystems. But number two is we did a survey, a study. And for us, the shark value in terms of tourism brings in about $200 million US. So for us to conserve $200 million is much more precedence than having a bowl of shark fin soup for $20 to $50. And so that was part of it. And we declared this in New York 3 years ago. The shark sanctuary has actually expanded to include Kiribati and other parts. Also recently, earlier this year in New York, as well as in Samoa last month, our president actually went ahead and made another bold statement where he declared Palau's EZ as a no-take for commercial tuna fishing, for foreign tuna commercial fishing. Basically, it's 80%, we're going to be conserving 80%, and the 20% will be heavily regulated mixed plate of management. Now, this will be the first attempt by any country in the world to actually declare its EZ. And the idea behind that is, we've been looking at the studies, we've been looking at the reports, and we know for a fact that in the Western Pacific, we hold 70% of the world's tuna stocks. And so for that to actually, for us to make an impact, our president made that bold statement. And in his statement in New York and in Samoa, he said very eloquently, he said, Palau is a small country in the Pacific. We will never have the tallest building in the world. We will never have the longest runway in the world. We will never have the fastest internet connection in the world. But what we can do is contribute what we have in terms of biodiversity. And we want to be the #1 leader in the world when it comes to looking at conservation, effectively our resources. So that's the reason why they were mentioning Palau, because we were the first in the world to declare shark sanctuary. Now we're taking this next step in declaring an EZ completely for conservation, commercial free from port fishing of tuna stocks. So as you can tell, it's going to be a challenge for us to move forward, but it's a challenge that we feel we can announce the Micronesia Challenge, which set off that as a group of Micronesia, the Western Pacific, we agreed to effectively conserve 20% of our terrestrial and 30% of our inshore. And I'm glad to report that we have met the targets, and now we're working on the conservation efforts. And that also includes sustainable financing, which most of us in the Pacific now, in the West Pacific, we have started initiating our financing, which kind of leads up to what previous speaker was saying. There's money out there, but for us in the small islands, we want to start, it's our responsibility as well. We want to show the world that, we can manage, but we just need a little bit of help from donors and partners to get us to that next vision. We have limited resources, it's how much we're going to put into the resources, and it's how we're going to move forward. And that's how I envision this dialogue that we're having here. It's just starting by a few countries, few representatives, eventually to have a big impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. It's been great to have you here, and I must say that personally I've been humbled and honored to be able to work with the countries in Micronesia and learn so much from the efforts that have been done there. I'd just like to show you this little video about what's going on in Ecuador, so I can also inform the continuation of our talk, if I may. All right. That's an example that's been replicated in many parts of Latin America, and that's the main reason why we have a diplomatic group in the region called the Buenos Aires Group, which is specifically dedicated to working together at the International Forum for the Protection of Whales. Just a reminder, if you guys can leave me your cards or contacts in the mug by the door, that would be much appreciated, so you can continue to be in touch. Anyone else willing to share thoughts? Please, you're welcome to. You wanna just go to the mic, please?
I would like to begin first by thanking you guys and all your work and all that you bring as well. And what I wanted to contribute with is actually what she said in the video hits the nail on the head, in the sense that we need to increase awareness for people to change and for things to change. And I think this is one of the main problems a lot of countries are actually facing. For example, the country that I come from, Bahrain, it's an island in the Arabian Gulf. Bahrain's economy depends on oil and gas. And one of the very interesting parts that has been coming onto the screen and what we're seeing at the moment is engaging businesses in order to conserve biodiversity within the country. However, even when you do go to these meetings and stuff, the lack of awareness doesn't really help mobilize resources, which is a big problem. And one of the things, actually, I did disagree with Valerie when she said we don't need scientists, we need local people, but we are the local people and we lack the scientists because there's no funding. So no one's funding the science, no one's funding the research, and we can't keep up with the status of what's out there. As much as Bahrain is a small island, we are blessed with hosting, along with the rest of the area, being the second largest herd of dugongs in the world after Australia. If you ask Bahrainis, over 90% of our population will not know this piece of information. If you ask a lot, like I'm actually a marine biologist, and when you go out and you see people coming for ecotourism, because part of Bahrain's vision for 2030 is to diversify its economy, so it wants to stop relying on oil and gas and actually look into tourism and other things. But one of the problems is, if you look at the environmental ecotourism, when people come, they're like, okay, what is the coral reef, and full stop, no one thinks about it. So 2 years ago, actually, the Bahraini government, in collaboration with the Shark Conservation Society in the UK, conducted the first shark survey. We're in 2014 now. So you can imagine we've had our first actual list of sharks in the country about 2 years ago. Although there was an initial list put together in 2005, I believe, talking with fishermen and local people who've been in the sea all their life, put these species together, and I remember seeing this and this and this. When the survey was actually done, only 16 species of sharks were recorded, and all of these were either juveniles, and they were all basically dead on boats, fishing boats coming back in. So that links in with the whole awareness things to mobilize resources and actually engage these businesses into conservation. We do need to spread that awareness. Another thing I wanted to actually put out there is that sometimes when we look at non-extractive businesses, for example, Bahrain was very well known for pearl diving because it actually had, like so many of the Arabian Gulf countries, the best quality of pearls in the world. 2 years ago again, Bahrain was awarded the UNESCO World Heritage Site on the biggest oyster bed in the Gulf. And what's interesting is we still have a couple of pearl divers who rely, that's their income. However, having many tourists come for all the pearls, so they come and basically harvest the oysters, and then you get the local people who get into conflict. So the question is, how do we address such topics? So I think there's a lot of different scenarios, but to keep things going, I do agree completely on engaging businesses, but the question is how, and it's one of the things that I'm personally struggling, so I would like to engage more out, personally.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, first of all, I think I said that and agree, of course, yes, we need science to inform decisions. It's not, science should not make the decisions, but it's an important tool. And sharks are a wonderful example from my point of view. I mean, we would today not have any international regulations on any shark species if there wouldn't have been scientists taking initiative, coming up with evidence that is so hard in terms of the depletion of shark populations, etc. And why is that? I think first of all it is because there is a common understanding that utilization of wildlife, be it in the ocean or on terrestrial, is just okay. And as soon as that needs to be changed, we have to have alternative jobs, livelihoods, etc. But it's not being looked at as what other treasures are actually we are losing. What does society lose in terms of benefits, and what future costs, probably unpayable costs, are coming with it. The other side is that, if you may, some of you will be familiar with CITES, the Convention on International Trade, where last year a number of shark species, fortunately, have been listed under protection, and the big opposition came from the fishing industry saying, first of all, we cannot implement it But at the same time, they always stated in the past, we don't need the conservation agreements to come in because we know everything to manage well. But then they say we don't know what to do because we don't know how many sharks there are, we don't know what the situation is, etc. So science is essential, but first of all I think is to change the view. It's like if we always have the view on extractive or consumptive use instead of a non-extractive or non-consumptive use, then automatically I think things can go wrong. At least we are losing this huge treasure that we on the other side have with non-extractive, but it is to a certain extent similar that we have the burden of proof, from my point of view, on the wrong side. Instead of those, particularly larger scale industry, who have to prove that their taking does not cause any risk to the environment, and support scientists to actually come up with that evidence. We always need scientists to come up with the evidence that the damage is there, and that puts us in a position where we usually are much too late to come with proposals and with decisions in international policy, because it takes the damage first to prove that the damage is there, instead of looking at the risk in the beginning. And I think that there's a similar mindset to adopt non-extractive use in the whole debate, to look for future opportunities for people and for a coexistence with the rest of nature, is the same mindset as looking at what evidence do we need to take our decisions.
Yes. Thank you very much for your comments. Right. Thank you. Actually, your region of the world is very dear to me because it was in Sultanate of Oman that I lost my fear of diving. That's right. First attempted to dive, and I was already 36 years old. But the beauty of the seas around your region really is what drove me to all of this. And you're absolutely right. Awareness is essential. And especially we need to have awareness and more dialogue among different stakeholders. What you mentioned about the potential conflicts of extractive and non-extractive use, especially among local communities, is something that brews from lack of dialogue. And many times the interests of those that are mining biodiversity instead of working with it sustainably, they try to manipulate and raise these artificial conflicts between different groups of stakeholders to take advantage of that and abuse biodiversity in the meantime while we are fighting and struggling to find balance. So awareness is also part of building that dialogue, and that is really important. So among ourselves we can sort out a balance between different needs and different views and make sure that it benefits the community as a whole. Joe?
I think one issue that when we look at evaluating the science, how much does it cost, but for small islands, there's another component to that, and that's that cultural significance of that resource to our culture. Sharks in Palau were traditionally revered. They're a symbol for bravery, but the only time you can go out and harvest or hunt for sharks is when you have a feast of a new traditional leader. And not just only sharks, but in Yap Yap Mantas and in other parts of the world, they have those iconic values. And I guess that's the part where it's kind of difficult for small island developing states to try to relate that to the north. Mm-hmm. Because to the north, everything's about economy. This is how much and so forth. But when it comes to the cultural component, how that is received as valuable by us, the islanders, we cannot express it in numbers. We cannot express it in words. It's just that sense of identity, knowing that when I was growing up, and we learned this through our elders and the value, and we just can't put our numbers around that, because if we lose that, then in a sense, every species that in the marine or the terrestrial that's endemic or that's transboundary, we lose every day, every year is identity that we lose in our lifetime. So I guess that's one of the cultural component that we have to look at, especially coming from small islands, such as ourselves, and even people from big continents that live off the coast, the coastal areas, even the mountains, they sure must associate it with other resources. You can't put that into words. I can't explain what a shark means to me culturally. Because it's something that's sacred, it's something that I cannot put any language to it. That's what I just wanted to.
Thank you.
Yep,
absolutely.
I try to be brief.
That's all right. The next shuttle is at 9, so.
You just reminded me, I had last week a discussion with a colleague from Australia, and we were actually became very sad at one point. It was recognizing how many countries have a wildlife species as their national icon, and of how many of those countries that is one of the most endangered species in their country. That is frightening, I think. And this goes back to the values and whether we live our values as well. I personally believe, for example, that today, if we are here in CBD or in other conservation biodiversity-related agreements, and we look at our scientific and traditional wisdom, and we see that there are ecologically keystone species which are so vital to keep, if they are healthy, to keep the ecosystem with all its biodiversity healthy. They are the indicators, they are the keepers of that kingdom. And if we could agree to at least take them out of the extractive use and make sure that they are very healthy and very well in their habitat, then I think it's much easier to actually come down to have biodiversity preserved, and it comes down to the values. Thank you for your contribution on this.
Anyone else? No? I would like to say thank you once again. We're honored and humbled by your presence, by your patience and your endurance of the cold in being with us here this evening. And we hope to continue this conversation. We're going to be here until the end of the meeting. Our business cards are also up there, and we will definitely like to continue this dialogue with you. Thank you very much for being here. Have a good night.
Nobody is allowed to say they are free while you're running around like this.
I have a warm heart.
Thank you very much for coming. Thank you so much. Thank you. It was great. Thank you.